Hello folks, hi there everyone, Hoagie Meister here and welcome to my YouTube channel, Hogarth's Global Astrology, Know Your Nation, Know Yourself. And today what I wanted to discuss was basically, look, there's a lot of stuff going on right now at the moment, as I'm sure all of you viewers are aware. And one of the things I wanted to talk about was the fact that Mercury is currently retrograde and has been retrograde since let me just double check. It has been retrograde since the 17th of June and then won't turn direct until the 12th of July. So we've still got about 11 days to go before Mercury goes direct. And I just wanted to discuss a few things about the recent solar eclipse. That was my last video, which happened on the solstice, which was June 21st, and how that will impact things and what's going on in the world. And I'm sure we can see a bit of that already. And then I wanted to talk about how sort of like the Mercury retrograde and that eclipse is potentially affecting us in the UK, just to wrap up. So I don't want this video to be too long because I'm quite busy today, but I just thought let's get stuck in and started. So let's have a little reminder, excuse the little bits of tape, but this is the as I spoke about in my last video, this is the Kala Sarpa yoga that is going on at the moment, which is when the nodes of the moon have all the planets to one side of them. So you can see all the planets are here. Currently Mercury is here in its own sign of Gemini, and there's this section here which is called Ardra, but it's in Mrigashira at the moment, which means to search. It's searching, looking for things, questing, trying to find health and healing, and I'm referring to the nakshatras here, which are part of the Indian Vedic astrology system. But the point is, as I've stated before, COVID-19 is what I refer to as the Gemini disease, and it's very closely associated with Mercury, as I've established in earlier videos. Wow. Oh, some birds doing some very interesting parakeets. Sorry, getting distracted there, doing some stuff in my tree. Now, I call this Gemini disease because it's associated with Mercury. Planet Mercury is communications, how we socialize, travel, infrastructure, planes and trains, cars, in terms of cars commuting, etc. And look at everything that's been affected. It corresponds to the upper lungs as well, and the wider respiratory system, but in particularly what we say. So as we know with the big C, it is spread by droplets. So this is very much, and communication and socializing, this is how it spreads. It's essentially a social virus. So this is why it has all these associations with Mercury. So Mercury is currently retrograde. So we understand that retrogrades can cause technical problems, as they usually do in most traditional Mercury retrogrades. But of course, because this is so closely connected with the virus, and a retrograde means to review, and so many planets are retrograde at the moment. We have, I think except for Venus, actually. Wow, the parakeets are really going for it. But we still have so many planets retrograde. So we have Saturn, Jupiter, and Pluto, and Mercury that's retrograde. I think Neptune is going to be next. I think Venus has just gone direct on the 25th of June, so very, very recently. So that's a positive hope. But what have we seen since Mercury went retrograde on the 17th? What are we talking about? We've seen in nations that there's been a flare-up again. The virus has come back again to an extent. In the US, which is something I wanted to talk about, this of course has been a lot more significant because essentially their first wave only went down a little bit and has now really gone back up in the southern states. And in many ways, as I've said before, because of the karmic legacy and pattern that the USA has. What happens in that country doesn't necessarily apply to the rest of the world, but broadly, the virus has gone down. However, there are pockets. So we saw there was a flare up again in Germany. There was a flare up in South Korea. Australia have just announced that might do a little local lockdown. We now have a local lockdown happening, or not local, but rather a lockdown happening in the city of Leicester, while the rest of the country will be able to continue to open on the 4th of July. So there's been all of these kind of, and then of course the United States where things are going up. So it's been patchy. Overall, the trend has been very good, but because of this retrograde, it just means yet again these things have to be reviewed. And because the virus COVID-19 is so closely connected to planet Mercury, when planet Mercury goes retrograde, which it does about 3 times a year, we're seeing in this instance that the virus could be coming back. Now, what does that mean for the long term? Does it mean that every Mercury retrograde that we're going to see a spike in the virus? Not necessarily, but it will have an influence. But let's hope come 2021, when the nodes of the moon finally move out of their very frustrating place, when basically here the north node Rahu has moved out of Ardra but is still in Gemini, but Ketu, the south node, which is tearing, which is in Mula, which means to tear everything out by the roots. Ketu is still there. So it won't be until Ketu moves into Scorpio that we kind of see that change. But look, at the end of the day, look, life is complicated, yeah? That's what the stars indicate, and this is what astrology is for. It's just to give everyone a heads up. What I want to remind people is that part of that eclipse shadow passed through China. So the eclipse of, solar eclipse of the solstice, June 21st, 2020, part of that passed through India and China. So part of it went through Africa, West Africa, the Middle East, and then up through the top part of India, and then into China. And funny enough, where that shadow went through was where that recent conflict happened between India and China in the Himalayas. But China will be affected by this eclipse quite strong. And one of the things we can see, which is happening already, so if we look at Hong Kong, for example, which was an issue before COVID, China has recently passed this quite strict and quite draconian law, and there were riots today because they started to arrest people. Now, of course, the world is watching, not only because of COVID, but of course there's issues as well with the Uyghur and the camps that people are being kept in. But now these ramifications for China are increasing because the UK government, after seeing these measures being enacted, has stated that it's breached the original agreement between China, the UK, and Hong Kong in regards to when Hong Kong was handed back to China in 1997, and there was supposed to be no interference of any significant kind for 50 years. So of course that time has not elapsed. So what the UK government has decided to do, which is quite extraordinary given recent politics where we're leaving, the EU, and there's been all sorts of issues around immigration, etc. But essentially, the people of Hong Kong have been offered citizenship by the UK government in response to what's happening to China. Now, isn't that incredible? I mean, that is just amazing. And of course, there is a historical legacy there, and I actually think ultimately it's the right thing to do, because if nations are supposed to stand up for democracy, and especially nations that maybe have had some legacy of empire, which of course the UK clearly has, but there's France and Holland, lots of other places, but such is the intimacy of the relationship. I think ultimately the government has done the right thing, and it will be very interesting to see what happens and how many people actually take up that offer and how China responds. So this, I see, is part of a bigger trend going forward of the politics of the world and how these big tectonic shifts are happening. There's going to be a big culmination where planet Jupiter and Saturn come back into their conjunction, which will happen on the winter solstice, but this will be a perfection. And what this means is it means they'll become exactly conjunct. So they're going to become exactly conjunct in the sign of Capricorn, and that really will set the new cycle for the next 20 years. And you can imagine, look at all the stuff that is in the pipeline. We have the US elections in November. We have, of course, Black Lives Matter. We have all sorts of tectonic shifts going on. We have things happening between India, between China, and now with the UK. So we are in dynamic and fascinating times. And already we can see the effect of this solar eclipse, which is an inauspicious one. It does relate to kind of conflict overall, but it also relates to dynamic change. Yeah, dynamic change, and this is what we're seeing, and for the whole globe. Who knows what the situation will be like with China down the road? But I am still sticking to what I said, which is that I think in the late summer, China will possibly be announced as the premier economy of the world, because of course, you know, their growth rate is bigger than anyone else's, and America's is not great. Neither is Europe, and the UK is really starting to kind of suffer with the effects. But hopefully we can turn it around. But this retrograde, if anything, is just exposing that more. So in terms of, because it's so closely related to the virus, Mercury retrogrades going forward will become even more significant until the virus is contained. So I just wanted to throw some insight on that one, and we'll see how it goes. But this is some of the results of that solar eclipse already. And remember, solar eclipses, you know, the effects of solar eclipses can happen for at least 6 months, sometimes 3 years. The solar eclipse in 2017 that went from one side of America to another was a 3-year effect eclipse, and look at what's happened in America since. The effects of that are starting to come to their culmination, and we see that there's going to be a new election there soon. So eclipses and retrogrades in general, always things to pay attention to. But these Mercury retrograde is that much more significant because of its connections with COVID. And of course, it's not good for negotiations or, you know, things like diplomacy, communication, the usual overlays. But it's particularly kind of hot and pertinent at this time because these eclipses are happening in the sign of Gemini. And Sagittarius of late. The next eclipse on the solstice is actually happening in sidereal Sagittarius, so on the winter solstice. So that's going to be very interesting. At the moment, as of yesterday, Jupiter has been going retrograde and has now moved back into his own sign of Sagittarius, the top part. So it's not going to be in Muller, but it's going to be over here. And it's currently with Pluto as well. So that shows great dynamics in terms of finance, the economy, intensity. There's going to be a great intensity of philosophy and beliefs, which could flare up in some kind of activity. Sometimes it can get a bit fanatical. So we'll have to see, particularly as we have another lunar eclipse happening on the 5th of July. And so there's a lot going on. So I just wanted to give people an update, but of course, still remember, hold tight, hold the light. Yeah. Just be mindful of how we communicate with others, what we say and what we share, because Mercury is retrograde, so things can get misconstrued. But again, this is also a time as well, a good time for study, for learning, revising things. Anyone that is a writer or an editor, this is a great time to go over a manuscript and start finishing that off. he says to himself, because I need to finish off my astrology book, which of course is called Fourth House Issues, Why the UK Struggles with Love, in brackets, until coronavirus. So much fallout, so I'm going to have to do a lot of rewrites in terms of that, and I'll give you more news on those things. But that's just a little heads up from me. So looking at the Mercury Retrograde and the solar eclipse, there will be a lot going on in terms of drama in the world. However, stay positive, pray. If that's your thing, even if it's not your thing, just wish for goodness in the world, because amongst the cray we can also see that there are positive things as well. There are positive changes happening as well. So it's not all bad. It's always a mixture. So let's focus on that good and encourage our governments and people around us to do the right thing. And you know, there will always be ups and downs. There will always be stuff kicking off in the world, and what you have to do is just acknowledge that, understand that it's happening, but yet still keep moving to the light, and then we should be good. And by 2021, but I would say by September, there's going to be a big change, because the nodes of the moon are actually going to move into Taurus and Scorpio. It just means different problems, but they won't be as intense as where they are now. So if anyone would like a consultation with me, I do consultations for love, relationships, money, destiny, finances, people's businesses, etc. Feel free to get in touch on my website, which is the archetypalblueprint.com. I'll just put that up in words. On there, you can also see my most recent blogs as well. So I'll do probably another blog in terms of an update of what's going on with the States, but I would recommend my Karma Bus blog, which I wrote in March. And we can see a lot of that playing out right now. And of course, you're welcome to follow me on Instagram or Twitter using the handle @Hogarth Brown. And I'll see you there. So feel free to get in touch. And also there is my Facebook page as well, which is called the archetypalblueprint.com. Many people get in touch with that, and I have particular updates on there. So I'm going to stop it there for now. I'm going to have quite a short video on this one. Have a good week. And remember, just hold the light, stay positive. Yes, things will continue to get crazy. Acknowledge it, but also understand, look at the positive changes that are happening in the world as well, and focus on those. Encourage positive change in the world while you hold the light, and together we'll all pull through. All right, cheers, bye.